The ballroom glittered with champagne and carefully constructed lies. Nathan stood frozen while the countdown to midnight echoed all around them. 10, 9, 8. Lily's eyes searched his face, confused and hopeful and terrified all at once. He'd asked her to pretend. But when her lips touched his at midnight, nothing about the way his heart stopped felt like pretending anymore. But how did we get here? Let me take you back to where this impossible night began. The Grand Sterling rose against the Newport coastline, like a monument to everything Nathan Cole had inherited, and nothing he'd chosen. He stood at the penthouse window watching the late afternoon light turn the ocean silver, his reflection ghosted in the glass. 35 years old, successful by every measure that mattered to his late father, and so hollow inside he could hear the echo. The New Year's Eve gala was 3 hours away. Down in the ballroom, staff moved through final preparations with the efficiency his family name demanded. Champagne towers gleaming under crystal chandeliers, ice sculptures catching light like frozen promises, a guest list that read like Newport Society's greatest hits, all arriving to judge how well Nathan Cole carried his father's legacy, while nursing their champagne and their opinions. His Patek Philippe caught the light as he checked the time. The watch had been his father's, passed down 6 months ago along with the hotel, the reputation, and the crushing weight of expectations Nathan had spent 35 years trying to meet. He'd succeeded at everything except the one thing that actually mattered: being enough for someone to stay. His phone buzzed against the window ledge, a message from his assistant confirming what he'd been dreading all week. Caroline Ashford had accepted the invitation, and she was bringing Richard Blackwell as her date. Nathan's jaw tightened until he thought his teeth might crack. His free hand curled into a fist, the gold watch band pressing hard into his wrist. 2 years he'd given Caroline. 2 years of believing that maybe someone finally saw him as more than the Cole heir, more than the hotel and the money and the name. Then his father died, and suddenly, love wasn't enough anymore. She'd left 3 weeks after the funeral. Her words still burned like acid every time he let himself remember them. "You're never going to be enough, Nathan. Not for me. Not for anyone who matters." Richard Blackwell had more money, bigger connections, a louder reputation in Newport circles. Caroline had traded substance for volume, and Nathan had learned the lesson his father had tried to teach him all along. Love was transaction. Everyone wanted something, and Nathan would never be enough to make anyone stay. The city lights began flickering on across the harbor, but Nathan didn't move from the window. Tonight had to be perfect. The Sterling needed this success. His father's legacy demanded flawless execution. But more than any of that, Nathan needed to prove to Caroline, to Richard, to everyone watching that her leaving hadn't shattered something fundamental inside him. Movement in the courtyard below caught his eye. 3 floors down, a woman knelt in the frost-covered garden, camera raised to catch the dying light. The photographer his event coordinator had hired, capturing images of ice on iron gates like frozen roses, actually mattered to someone. Then a young server appeared, shivering in her uniform without a coat. Nathan watched the photographer lower her camera and pull off her own winter coat without hesitation, just wrapped it around the girl's shoulders, like it was nothing. The server was crying. The photographer was smiling, already wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. Going back to her work, like giving away something precious, cost her nothing at all. Something shifted in Nathan's chest, a crack in the ice he'd been carrying since Caroline walked away. Who gives their coat to a stranger in December and smiles about it? He didn't know her name or anything about her except that she'd been hired to photograph tonight's event, but something about the way she moved, pure instinct, toward kindness, with no performance and no hesitation, made him feel curious for the first time in 6 months. His assistant knocked with last-minute approvals needed. Nathan gave them automatically, his mind elsewhere. Then he added almost, without thinking, to make sure the photographer in the courtyard had everything she needed. Coffee, heat, whatever kept her from freezing. His mind whispered the belief he'd held for months. Love was transaction. Everyone wanted something. But she'd given her coat away for nothing. To a stranger, maybe not everyone, he thought, and the possibility unsettled him more than Caroline's impending arrival. He had no idea that kindness would cost him everything he thought he knew about love. The sun set over Newport, and the Grand Sterling transformed into something out of a dream. Nathan stood in his penthouse bedroom, buttoning his Tom Ford tuxedo, watching city lights multiply across the harbor like fallen stars. His reflection showed a man who looked exactly like his father had at 35. Controlled, successful, empty. The ballroom below would be perfect because Nathan had made certain of it. Every detail checked twice, every contingency planned. The kind of flawless execution his father had trained into him since childhood. The kind that made the Cole name mean something in Newport society. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his assistant. Caroline had just confirmed her arrival time with unusual specificity. 7:45. 15 minutes before the gala's official 8 o'clock start. Nathan's hand stilled on his bow tie. 7:45 meant she'd arrive when most guests were still trickling in. When the room was full enough for people to notice, but empty enough for her entrance to land. She knew exactly what she was doing. Caroline always did. He thought about the photographer in the courtyard, the way she'd smiled while giving away something it probably took her months to afford. Caroline had never given anything without calculating the return. How had he loved someone for 2 years, and not seen that she measured every gesture against what she'd gain? Because you were too busy trying to be enough. His father's voice whispered in his memory. Love makes you weak, Nathan. Business is clean. Love is messy, and it makes you vulnerable. And vulnerability is fatal. Nathan finished the bow tie with hands that almost shook. His father had been wrong about many things, but maybe not about love. Maybe love really was just another business deal with better lighting and worse terms. The Bentley was waiting when Nathan went down. He drove himself to the ballroom entrance, needing those 10 minutes alone to build the armor he'd wear all night. The armor that said Caroline's arrival didn't matter. That seeing her with Richard Blackwell wouldn't hurt. The ballroom stole his breath. Despite having inspected it an hour earlier, his staff had outdone themselves. Everything gleamed. Crystal chandeliers caught light and threw it back in rainbow fragments. Veuve Clicquot flowed in golden rivers. Ice sculptures stood sentry between champagne towers. Guests were already arriving in their gowns and jewels. Laughter echoing off vaulted ceilings. Newport society gathering to celebrate and judge in equal measure. Nathan moved through the crowd accepting congratulations, shaking hands, playing the role he'd been born and trained to play. But his eyes kept searching for the photographer. She had to be here somewhere. Working, invisible, the way her job required. He wanted to see her again, though he couldn't have explained why. He found her near the east windows, camera raised, capturing guests as they entered. She'd changed into a simple black dress that looked elegant, despite probably costing very little. Her long dark hair was down now, catching chandelier light. She was still shivering slightly, even inside, because she'd given away her coat to someone who needed it more. Nathan started toward her. He didn't know what he'd say. Didn't know why he wanted to talk to her. Just knew he needed to. The energy in the room shifted like air pressure dropping before a storm. Every conversation paused mid-word. Every head turned toward the entrance. Nathan's chest tightened, because he knew, even before he looked, exactly who had just walked through those doors. Carolyn Ashford entered in emerald silk, that probably cost more than most people's cars. Blonde hair, perfect, smile dazzling. Diamonds at her throat, catching light like warnings. One hand resting possessively on Richard Blackwell's arm. Richard, tall and silver-haired, despite being only 40, a smile that never quite reached his cold eyes. Richer than Nathan, better connected than Nathan. Everything Carolyn wanted more than she'd ever wanted Nathan. They moved through the crowd like visiting royalty, and everyone parted for them. Caroline's laugh carried across the ballroom, bright and sharp as breaking glass. Nathan stood frozen, watching the woman he'd loved greet people who'd been at his dinner table, who'd attended events as his date, who now smiled at her like she'd always been Richard's. The photographer lowered her camera. Nathan saw it happen in his peripheral vision. Her lens had been pointed at the entrance, but she'd stopped mid-frame, her hands carefully lowering the equipment like she sensed something fragile fracturing in the air. Nathan walked to her before he could think better of it. His voice came out lower and rougher than he intended when he spoke. "Please don't photograph that woman." The photographer looked up at him with eyes that were impossibly kind. She apologized immediately, saying she hadn't meant to, asking if he was all right. When was the last time someone had asked if he was all right and actually wanted to know the answer? "That's my ex-girlfriend," Nathan heard himself say. The words came out before he could stop them, before he could remember that Coleman didn't confess vulnerabilities to strangers at their own events. "The one with Richard Blackwell? She left me 6 months ago, 3 weeks after my father's funeral." The photographer's expression softened into something that looked like genuine compassion rather than the polite sympathy Newport society offered. "She said she was sorry, and it sounded real." "Don't be," Nathan managed. "It was 6 months ago. I'm fine." But the way she looked at him said she knew he was lying. Caroline's laugh rang out again, closer now. Nathan's jaw clenched so hard, something in his temple throbbed. The photographer was still watching him with those kind eyes, and suddenly Nathan couldn't breathe in this ballroom full of people who'd watched his humiliation, who'd probably gossiped about it over dinner, who knew he hadn't been enough. The night he'd planned to endure became the night he couldn't face alone. And standing right in front of him was a woman who'd given away her coat to a stranger because kindness didn't cost anything. Maybe kindness could save him tonight too. The past he'd buried walked through those doors, and suddenly the night he'd planned to endure became the night he couldn't face alone. Nathan couldn't stop watching Caroline. She moved through his ballroom like she owned it, like she hadn't said the words that still woke him at 3 in the morning. Like Richard Blackwell's hand on her waist was the most natural thing in the world. Every laugh felt aimed at Nathan. Every smile felt like a blade. The photographer had moved away to give him space. Back to her job capturing moments Nathan wished would stop happening. He should circulate, greet guests, play the perfect host his father had spent decades training him to be. But his feet wouldn't move. His chest felt too tight. His hands were shaking, so he shoved them deep in his pockets, where Newport society couldn't see weakness. Richard leaned down to whisper something in Caroline's ear. She laughed, tilting her head back, her hand coming up to rest on Richard's chest with casual intimacy. Everything she used to do with Nathan. Something broke inside him then. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just a quiet crack, like ice finally giving way under too much weight. He found the photographer near the champagne tower, framing a shot of light through crystal. When Nathan stepped into her line of sight, she lowered the camera, probably about to politely ask him to move. But Nathan spoke first, and the words came out desperate. "I need your help." The photographer's eyes widened slightly. Nathan kept talking before he could lose his nerve or remember pride. "I need you to pretend to be my date tonight." The words tumbled out fast. "Just for a few hours, just until she leaves. I'll pay you whatever you want. Please." The photographer stared at him like he'd lost his mind. He probably had. Caroline was across the ballroom watching them with sharp interest, and Nathan was begging a stranger to save him from his own humiliation. "I know how this sounds," Nathan said, hearing the crack in his own voice. "I know it's insane, but I can't stand here all night watching her with him and looking like the pathetic ex she left behind. I just need someone. Anyone. Just for tonight." The photographer glanced across the ballroom, following Nathan's desperate gaze. Caroline was definitely watching them now, her expression calculating. How much? The photographer asked quietly. Nathan named a figure that made her eyes go wide. Enough to cover months of rent. Enough to matter. Enough to be exactly what it was. A transaction. A business deal. Proving Caroline right about him after all. The photographer bit her lip. Nathan could see her thinking, could practically see her calculating what that money would mean. He felt sick offering it, felt like he was proving every ugly thing Caroline had ever said about him being transactional and hollow. But he was drowning, and this woman with kind eyes was the only lifeline in sight. Okay, she said finally, but I have conditions. Nathan would have agreed to anything. He nodded. You don't touch me without asking first, she said firmly, meeting his eyes. You treat me with respect, and when this is over, we're done. No expectations beyond tonight. Clear. Deal, Nathan said immediately. Then, remembering his manners through the desperation, he added, I'm Nathan. Nathan Cole. I know who you are, she said with a small, sad smile. I'm Lily. Lily Reynolds. Lily. The name fit her somehow. Delicate, but resilient. Beautiful, but unpretentious. Real. Nathan held out his hand, palm up. May I? Lily looked at his extended hand for a long moment. Nathan could see her second-guessing everything, see her wanting to back out. But then, she glanced at something invisible, maybe the eviction notice, probably sitting on her kitchen counter, and placed her hand in his. Her palm was cold. She was still paying the price for giving away her coat. Nathan's fingers closed gently around hers, and something electric shot through him. Not just attraction, though, that was there too. But recognition, like his body knew something his brain hadn't figured out yet. Thank you, he said quietly, meaning it more than she could possibly know. I won't forget this. Lily nodded. Let's give them a show then. Nathan led her onto the floor. He could feel Caroline's eyes tracking them, could feel the shift in the room's attention. People were noticing Nathan Cole with someone new. Someone who wasn't Caroline at. Who is she? Someone whispered nearby. Where did Nathan find her? She's beautiful. Nathan's hand found Lily's waist. She was small next to him, but when she looked up, her eyes held steel underneath the gentleness. Ready? The music started. A slow waltz. Nathan pulled Lily closer, one hand firm on her waist, the other holding her hand against his chest. They began to move, and she followed his lead, perfectly. Light on her feet, graceful, like they'd been dancing together for years instead of seconds. She's watching, Lily murmured after a moment. I know, Nathan said. Should I look at you like I'm falling for you? Lily asked. Or like, I'm already there. The question surprised a laugh out of Nathan. Actual laughter. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed at anything. Your choice. Already there then, Lily decided, more convincing. She looked up at him and suddenly, Nathan forgot this was pretend. Forgot they'd agreed to this 5 minutes ago for the price of a few months' rent. Forgot everything except the way her eyes caught the chandelier light, and the way her hand felt in his, and the way his heart was doing something strange and unfamiliar in his chest. You're good at this, he managed to say, at pretending, at making it look real. Lily's smile was sad. Sometimes pretending is easier than the real thing. Nathan understood that more than she knew. They turned across the floor and he saw Caroline watching, saw Richard watching, saw the entire ballroom watching, but all he could focus on was the woman in his arms, who'd agreed to save him from money and was somehow making him feel more real than he'd felt in months. She said yes. Neither of them knew that saying yes to pretending would mean saying yes to something terrifyingly real. They danced through 3 songs before Nathan realized he'd stopped counting, stopped watching Caroline, stopped performing for Newport Society. He was just dancing with Lily, and it felt like the first real thing that had happened to him in 6 months. So what's your story? Nathan asked, as they swayed. Besides being generous enough to give your coat to strangers, and crazy enough to help desperate hoteliers. Lily's laugh was soft. Photographer. Struggling. 3 weeks behind, on rent. The usual Newport story for people without trust funds. Is that why you said yes? The money. Partly, Lily admitted. She didn't lie or pretend otherwise. And Nathan found that refreshing, after years of Caroline's calculated half-truths. But also because you looked like you needed saving, and I've always been terrible at saying no when someone needs help. Even when helping costs you, especially then, Lily said. My fatal flaw, according to every practical person who's ever met me. I'd rather freeze than watch someone else shiver. Nathan's hand tightened slightly on her waist. That's not a flaw. That's just being human. Tell that to my landlord. They turned and Nathan caught sight of himself in one of the ballroom's mirrored panels. For the first time in months, he didn't look hollow. He looked alive. Why did she leave? Lily asked quietly. Nathan didn't pretend not to know who she meant. My father died, she said. I was too consumed by grief to be a proper partner. 3 weeks later, she was with Richard. That's not grief, Lily said with unexpected fierceness. That's her being cruel and blaming you for it. Something loosened in Nathan's chest, a knot he'd been carrying since Caroline walked away, since she'd made him believe his grief made him unlovable. I thought I wasn't enough. Nathan heard himself confess. She said I'd never be enough for anyone who mattered. Then she didn't matter, Lily said simply, because you're already enough. You're here. You're standing. You're holding yourself together with duct tape and determination, but you're still here. That's more than enough. Single. Quotes. Nathan's throat tightened. When was the last time someone had seen him struggling and called it strength instead of weakness? Thank you, he managed. For what? For making tonight bearable. For being kind when you had every reason not to be. For being real when everyone else in this room is performing. Lily smiled up at him. You're welcome. But, Nathan, you're being real, too, right now. Maybe more real than you've been in a while. The song ended, but Nathan didn't let go. Couldn't let go. Because Lily was right. For the first time since his father's funeral, he felt hale. And it terrified him how much of that realness came from holding a woman he'd met an hour ago. People were staring now, but not with pity. With curiosity, with interest. Like Nathan Cole was finally interesting again. Instead of just the poor man Caroline Ashford had discarded. Want to dance again? Nathan asked. Or do you need a break? I should probably do my actual job at some point, Lily said with a laugh. Your event coordinator will fire me if I spend the whole night dancing instead of photographing. I own the hotel, Nathan pointed out. You're unfireable tonight. Abuse of power, Mr. Cole. Absolutely, Nathan agreed. Dance with me anyway. Lily shook her head, but she was smiling. One more. Then, I really do need to work. They danced. One more song. Then, another. Then Nathan lost count again because all he could focus on was the way Lily fit against him. The way she laughed at his terrible jokes. The way she looked at him like he was worth looking at instead of just tolerating. He'd asked her to pretend, but as her hand found his, nothing about the way his heart shifted felt like pretending anymore. The ballroom glittered with champagne and possibility. Midnight approached, with the inevitability of New Year's Eve, bringing with it the tradition Nathan had been dreading. The countdown, the kiss, the moment when everyone in the room would be paired off celebrating while Nathan stood alone, remembering last year when Caroline had been his, and the future had felt certain. But Lily was still here, still by his side despite having fulfilled her photographic duties an hour ago. She'd drifted back to him between shots like a moth to light up, and Nathan had stopped questioning why, and started being grateful. You don't have to stay, Nathan said as 11:45 approached. Our deal was just to help me through seeing her. You've done that. More than that. Lily looked up at him from where they stood near the windows overlooking the harbor. Fireworks were being set up on boats below, preparing for the midnight show. "Do you want me to leave?" "No. God, no. I don't want to keep you if you'd rather be somewhere else." "Nathan," Lily said gently. "Where else would I be? My apartment where the heat doesn't work and the landlord leaves threatening notes. This is the nicest New Year's Eve I've had in years. Let me enjoy it a little longer." Therefore, Nathan stopped arguing and just stood with her, watching the boats position themselves in the harbor. Behind them, the ballroom buzzed with energy as midnight approached. Champagne flowed faster. Laughter grew louder. Couples began finding each other in preparation for the moment when the clock struck 12. 15 minutes, someone called out. The energy shifted higher. Nathan glanced across the room. Caroline was watching him again, but for the first time all night, Nathan didn't care. She was with Richard. He was with Lily. And Lily had looked at him like he was enough. "This is going to sound crazy," Nathan said, turning back to Lily. "Actually, everything tonight has been crazy, so maybe this fits. But I'm glad you're here. Not just because you helped me save face, because you made tonight better than I thought it could be." Lily's smile was soft in the dim light. "It's not crazy. I'm glad I'm here too. Even if it started as a transaction, it doesn't feel transactional anymore." "No," Nathan agreed, "it doesn't." 10 minutes to midnight, the band started playing something slow and romantic. Couples drifted to the dance floor. Nathan held out his hand to Lily without thinking about it, without asking permission, just hoping. She took it. They moved to the center of the floor as the countdown began in the distance. 5 minutes. 4. The room seemed to contract around them until it was just Nathan and Lily swaying in the glow of 1,000 candles. "I don't know the rules for fake dating," Lily murmured against his shoulder. "Do we kiss at midnight? Is that part of the show?" Nathan's heart stuttered. "We can," he managed. "If you want. But Lily, I need you to know something." She pulled back to look at him. "What?" "If I kiss you at midnight, it won't be for the show." The words came out raw and honest and more vulnerable than Nathan had been in years. "It'll be because I want to. Because you've made me feel real again. Because I keep forgetting this is pretend." 2 minutes to midnight. The countdown grew louder. Around them, couples were finding each other, pulling close. Lily's eyes were wide, searching Nathan's face for something he hoped she'd find. "Then kiss me," she whispered, "and let's both stop pretending." 1 minute. 30 seconds. The crowd began counting down together, their voices rising in excitement. But Nathan couldn't hear them, could only hear his own heartbeat and Lily's breath, and the moments stretching between them like a promise. 10. 9. 8. Nathan's hand came up to cup Lily's face. Her skin was soft under his palm. Her eyes closed, his heart hammered against his ribs. 5. 4. 3. "Lily," he breathed. 2. 1. Happy New Year. The ballroom erupted in celebration. Fireworks exploded outside the windows, in bursts of gold and silver and blue. Champagne corks popped like gunfire. People cheered and laughed and kissed. And Nathan kissed Lily. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative. It was the kiss of a man who'd been hollow for 6 months and finally remembered what it felt like to be full. His hand slid into her hair. Her fingers gripped his jacket. The world spun and narrowed until there was nothing but her mouth on his, and the fireworks behind his closed eyes, and the feeling of everything changing. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Lily's eyes were still closed. Her lips were pink, and her cheeks were flushed, and she looked absolutely undone. "Wow," she whispered. "Yeah," Nathan agreed. Around them, people were toasting and laughing, moving on to the next moment. But Nathan couldn't move. could only stare at Lily and wonder what the hell he'd just done. Wonder how a kiss that was supposed to be for show had felt like the realest thing that had ever happened to him. The countdown ended. The kiss began. And in that moment, the line between pretend and real disappeared completely. The party continued around them, but Nathan couldn't focus on anything except Lily. They'd moved to the hotel library after midnight, escaping the noise and the crowds and the weight of Newport society's collective gaze. The library was Nathan's favorite room in the Sterling. All floor-to-ceiling, windows and leather chairs and fireplace, casting shadows that danced like secrets. Lily stood by the windows, looking out at the harbor where fireworks still painted the sky in bursts of color. She'd kicked off her heels somewhere between the ballroom and here, and her hair had come partially undone from kissing Nathan senseless at midnight. She looked beautiful and real, and Nathan couldn't stop staring. "This is insane," Lily said softly, not turning from the window. "All of this tonight. Us. Single quaz." Nathan walked to her, stopping close enough to touch, but not touching. Yet, which part feels most insane? "The part where I agreed to pretend to be your date for money," Lily said, and then forgot it was. Pretend somewhere between the dancing and the kissing. "I forgot to," Nathan admitted, "probably around the second dance. Maybe before that. Maybe the moment you said yes." Lily turned to face him then. Her eyes were bright in the firelight, vulnerable in a way that made Nathan's chest ache. "What happens now, Nathan?" "The party's over. The deal's done. I saved you from your ex, and you paid me enough to keep my landlord happy for months. We should probably just say thank you and good night, and go back to our separate lives." "We should," Nathan agreed, "but I don't want to." "Me neither," Lily whispered. They stood there in the space between should and want, neither quite brave enough to cross it. The clock on the mantel ticked past 1 in the morning. Outside, the last fireworks faded to smoke and ash. Nathan broke first. "Stay," he heard himself say, "just for a while. Let's talk. Let me know you. Let this be real for a few more hours before reality comes back." Lily studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded and moved to one of the leather chairs by the fire. Nathan followed, taking the chair across from her, close enough to touch if either of them reached out. "What do you want to know?" Lily asked. "Everything," Nathan said. "Start anywhere." So Lily talked. She told him about growing up in Providence, about her mother who died when Lily was 12, about her father who'd done his best raising a daughter alone, about discovering photography in high school and falling in love with the way a camera could capture truth better than words, about moving to Newport 3 years ago, chasing a dream that was turning out to be harder than she'd imagined. Nathan listened like her words were water and he'd been dying of thirst. He asked questions, Lily answered. The fire burned lower. The clock ticked toward 2. "Your turn," Lily said eventually. "Tell me about you." "The hell you, not the colère everyone sees." Nathan found himself talking about things he never discussed, about his father's impossible standards and the weight of never quite measuring up, about Caroline and how she'd seemed to love him until the moment loving him required sacrifice, about the loneliness of inheriting an empire and realizing he'd trade all of it for one person who stayed. "I'm sorry," Lily said when he finished, "for all of it. For your father and Caroline, and the weight you're carrying. But Nathan, you're measuring up just fine. You just haven't found people worth measuring up for yet." Something in Nathan's chest cracked open at that. A dam he'd been holding closed for so long he'd forgotten it was there. Before he could think better of it, before he could remember all the reasons, this was a terrible idea. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his checkbook. "I want to pay you," he said. "For tonight, for what we agreed." Lily's face went carefully blank. "Oh, right. Of course." Nathan wrote quickly, his handwriting sharp in the dim light. When he tore out the check and held it out to Lily, her hands shook slightly as she took it. She glanced down at the amount, and her eyes went wide. "Nathan, this is way more than we discussed." "You earned it," Nathan said. "You saved me tonight. Made me feel human again. That's worth more than any number I could write." Lily stood up the check, clutched in her hand. Something had shifted in her expression. Closed off. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was polite now, distant. "This will help. With rent and everything." "Lily, it's late," she said, not quite meeting his eyes anymore. "I should go. Thank you for tonight, for the dance and the conversation, for being kind." She was leaving. Nathan could see it happening, could see her pulling away, but he couldn't understand why. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," Lily said. And now she was moving toward the door, gathering her shoes, her camera, her coat that wasn't there because she'd given it to someone else. "You did everything right." "That's the problem. I don't understand." Lily stopped at the doorway. When she looked back, her eyes were bright, with unshed tears. "You paid me, Nathan. For tonight. For pretending. And maybe it didn't feel like pretending to either of us. But you still paid me. And I still took the money. That makes this a transaction. Just like you said, love always is." "Lily, wait. That's not what I meant." But she was gone, walking out of the library, out of the hotel, out of Nathan's life, as quickly as she'd entered it. The check was gone with her. And Nathan was left standing alone by a dying fire, wondering how trying to do the right thing had broken something he hadn't even realized he wanted to keep whole. He thought he was being generous. He had no idea he'd just broken something fragile that had just begun to bloom. For days past, Nathan tried to work. Tried to focus on the Sterling's post-New Year operations and the stack of contracts requiring his attention and the 100 small decisions that came with running a luxury hotel. But all he could think about was Lily walking away with his check and the look in her eyes. That said, he'd ruined something neither of them had known how to name. He'd tried calling. She didn't answer. He'd tried texting. She didn't respond. His assistant mentioned that the photographer from New Year's had submitted her invoice and requested they not call her for future events. Nathan had stared at that email for 20 minutes before deleting it without response. She walked away with his money and without his heart, and he finally understood what Caroline had meant. He really didn't know how to love without making it transactional. On the 5th day, Nathan did something he never did. He left the Sterling in the middle of a workday and drove to the small cafe in town, where his assistant said Lily sometimes worked between photo sessions. The cafe was nothing like the Sterling. All mismatched chairs and local art on the walls and coffee that came in chipped mugs instead of bone china. Lily was there, sitting by the window with her camera on the table and her laptop open to editing software. She looked tired, beautiful, but tired. When Nathan walked in, her eyes went wide and something flashed across her face too quick to read. Nathan walked to her table before he could lose his nerve. "Can we talk?" Lily glanced around the cafe like she was checking for exits. "I'm working." 5 minutes. Please. She closed her laptop with deliberate care. 5 minutes. Nathan sat down across from her, suddenly unsure how to start. He'd run through this conversation 100 times in his head, but none of his rehearsed words felt right. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For the check. For making you feel like I was paying you for something that felt real. I wasn't trying to reduce what we had to a transaction. I was trying to keep my promise." "I know," Lily said quietly. "That's what makes it worse. You were being honorable and I ran away because I couldn't handle that. It hurt anyway. I hurt you. You made me feel like what we shared was worth something," Lily said, and her voice was achingly vulnerable. "And then you wrote a check for it. And I know that's not fair, because we made a deal, and you kept it. But Nathan, Somewhere between the dancing and the kissing and the talking in the library, I forgot about the money. I forgot why I'd said yes. And taking that check reminded me that, for you, maybe it was still about the deal. Nathan's hands curled into fists on the table. It wasn't, God, Lily. It stopped being about the deal. The moment you smiled at me, but I didn't know how to say that. Didn't know how to cross the line from transaction to real when real still terrifies me. Because of Caroline, because I keep believing I'm not enough, that everyone leaves, eventually. That love is just another thing people trade for something better. Nathan's voice cracked. You're the first person in years who made me think maybe I was wrong, and then I ruined it by being exactly the man Caroline said I was. Hollow and transactional and incapable of real connection. Lily reached across the table. Her hand covered his, and the touch sent electricity straight to Nathan's heart. You're not hollow, she said fiercely. You're hurting. There's a difference. Hollow people don't stand in coffee shops apologizing. They don't spend 5 days trying to call someone who won't answer. They don't look at me the way you're looking at me right now. How am I looking at you? Like I matter, Lily whispered. Like maybe I'm enough too. Nathan turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. You're more than enough. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for. They sat there in the cafe, holding hands across a scarred table, while the world moved around them. 5 minutes turned to 10, then 20. Neither of them mentioned it. The coffee shop filled with afternoon customers. Outside, winter light faded toward evening. So what now? Lily asked eventually. Where do we go from here? I don't know, Nathan admitted. I just know I don't want this to end. Don't want you to be someone I met once and lost because I didn't know how to hold on without crushing what I was holding. Lily smiled, small and uncertain, but real. Maybe we start over. No deals, no transactions, just two people trying to figure out if what they felt on New Year's Eve was real or just the champagne and the fireworks. It was hail, Nathan said, with absolute certainty. At least for me. For me too, Lily said. They ordered coffee, they didn't drink, and talked until the cafe closed. Made plans to see each other again without contracts or payments or any pretense beyond wanting to be together. Nathan walked Lily to her car and kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made his chest ache. When he drove back to the Sterling, Nathan felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real, fragile, terrifying hope that maybe he could have this. Have her. Have something real. He had no idea that across town, Richard Blackwell had just received a very interesting phone call about Nathan Cole's New Year's Eve date, or that by morning, everything Nathan was hoping for would be ashes. Richard Blackwell had lost Caroline. He wouldn't lose the satisfaction of destroying the woman who'd made Nathan Cole smile. Lily woke up to her phone, exploding with notifications. Not the gentle buzz of a few messages, but the continuous vibration of hundreds pouring in. Instagram, Facebook, email, text messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Her heart hammered as she grabbed the phone and opened Instagram. The first thing she saw was her own face, her photo from New Year's Eve. Her in Nathan's arms on the dance floor, looking up at him like he hung the moon. Someone had posted it with a caption that made her stomach turn to ice. Newport's newest escort, photographer Lily Reynolds, paid to play Nathan Cole's date at Sterling Nigala. Sources confirmed $10,000 transaction. Elite Newport companions strikes again. The post had been shared 2,000 times, liked 20,000. The comments were brutal. Of course, he had to pay someone to date him after Carolyn left. She's pretty, but not that pretty. Anyone know her rates? Asking for a friend. Imagine being so desperate you have to hire a date. Lily's hands shook so hard, she dropped the phone. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She grabbed her laptop and searched her name. The first page of results was all articles from Newport gossip, blogs, and society pages. Nathan Cole's paid date revealed. Sterling Hotel heir hires photographer as New Year's companion. Carolyn Ashford responds to ex's desperate move. There was even a fake website for elite Newport companions with Lily's photo and a rate card. Professional girlfriend experiences. Holiday dates. Social events. All with prices that made Lily want to vomit. Her phone rang. A client canceling their spring wedding booking because they couldn't be associated with someone of questionable moral character? It rang again. Another client, then another. By noon, her client list was empty. Every single booking canceled. Every deposit returned with terse professionalism that couldn't quite hide the judgment. Her landlord called to say several residents had complained about having someone of her profession in the building. Could she please start looking for alternative housing? Maya, her best friend, and the only person who knew the truth about New Year's Eve, showed up at 2 with wine and fury. This is character assassination, Maya said, pacing Lily's apartment. Someone is deliberately destroying you. This didn't just happen, Lily. Someone made it happen. Lily knew. Who? She'd seen Caroline watching them all night, had seen the calculation in her eyes, and Richard Blackwell had connections everywhere in Newport. Connections to gossip bloggers and social media influencers, and the kind of people who could create a convincing fake website in 24 hours. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Nathan. Lily stared at the screen, unable to answer. What could she say? That being with him had cost her everything. That she'd lost her career, her home, her reputation because she'd been stupid enough to fall for a man who lived in a world that would destroy her for daring to enter it? She let it go to voicemail, then listened to it, with tears streaming down her face. Lily, please call me back. I saw the posts. I know who did this. I'm going to fix it. I promise. Please. Just let me fix it, please. But what Nathan didn't understand was that some things couldn't be fixed. Not in Newport. Not when your name had been dragged through society's mud and come out covered in filth that would never quite wash clean. By sunset, Lily had made her decision. Newport wasn't home anymore. It couldn't be. Not when walking down the street meant strangers whispering and pointing. Not when her career was destroyed and her name was synonymous with scandal. She'd go back to Providence. Start over. Build a life somewhere people didn't know her face or the lies attached to it. She began packing with mechanical efficiency. Clothes and boxers, camera equipment, carefully wrapped. The life she'd built in Newport, reduced to cardboard and tape. Her phone buzzed with another message from Nathan. Please, don't disappear. Please, give me a chance to make this right. But Lily was already gone, already deciding that loving Nathan Cole had been the most expensive mistake she'd ever made. By morning, her name was everywhere. By noon, her client list was empty. By sunset, she'd decided Newport wasn't home anymore. 3 days after, Lily stopped answering his calls. Nathan stood in his office staring at his laptop screen and the evidence his security team had just delivered. Richard Blackwell's digital fingerprints were all over the character assassination. Fake websites created from IP addresses traced back to Richard's company. Payments to gossip blog. A coordinated social media campaign designed to destroy Lily's reputation and humiliate Nathan in the process. Nathan's head of security, a former FBI agent named Marcus, had gathered it all. Emails, bank transfers, the original photo that started everything, stolen from the Sterling's security footage and edited to look more damning. Everything they needed to prove this was calculated malice. We've got him, Marcus said. This is harassment, defamation, possibly fraud with that fake escort website. You want to file charges? We have enough to bury him. Nathan wanted to do more than file charges. He wanted to drive to Richard's office and tear the man apart with his bare hands. But violence wouldn't fix what had been broken. Wouldn't give Lily back her clients, or her reputation, or the peace she'd had before loving Nathan had cost her everything. "Can we prove it was him?" Nathan asked. "Definitively. Every piece of this leads back to him or his people," Marcus confirmed. "He was sloppy, because he didn't think you'd look this hard. Didn't think you'd care enough about some photographer to actually investigate." But Nathan did care. Cared more than he'd cared about anything in years. Lily had shown him what real looked like, and he'd let her be destroyed for it. Let Newport society's ugliness touch her because he hadn't protected her fast enough. Because he'd been too busy worrying about the Sterling's reputation to realize protecting Lily was the only thing that actually mattered. His phone buzzed with yet another message to Lily that would probably go unread like all the others. Nathan stared at it and made a decision that would either save everything or destroy what little he had left. "Get me a meeting with the Newport Society Council," Nathan said, "and every major media outlet in the city. I'm going public." Marcus's eyes widened. "Nathan, if you do this, there's no taking it back. You'll be dragging yourself and the Sterling into the scandal. Your investors won't like it. The board will push back. This could cost you everything." "Then it costs me everything," Nathan said. "I've spent my whole life protecting the Cole name, the Sterling's reputation, playing it safe, and keeping my head down. Where did that get me? A dead father who never approved, an ex who left anyway, and the first woman who made me feel real in years thinks I'm too much of a coward to defend her." Nathan stood up and grabbed his jacket. "I'm done playing it safe, done letting good people pay the price for my family's respectability. Lily matters more than any of this, and if Newport society wants to destroy her, they'll have to destroy me first." He spent his whole life protecting the Cole name. Tonight, he'd burn it down if that's what loving her required. The Newport Society Council met monthly in the Sterling's private conference room, a tradition Nathan's father had started decades ago. 30 of Newport's most influential residents, gathering to discuss charity events and social calendars, and who deserved to be welcomed into their exclusive circles. Nathan had never missed a meeting, had sat through hundreds of them over the years, nodding politely while old money decided who mattered and who didn't. Tonight, he crashed his own meeting with a laptop full of evidence and zero patience for their politics. Nathan, Margaret Ashford, Caroline's mother and the council president, said with forced pleasantness, "We weren't expecting you this evening." "I know," Nathan said. He set his laptop on the conference table and connected it to the projector. "But you're going to want to see this." Richard Blackwell sat 3 seats down from Margaret, looking supremely Caroline was beside him, already watching Nathan with calculating interest. The rest of the council murmured among themselves, confused and curious. Nathan pulled up the first document, an email from Richard to a gossip blogger, complete with payment information and specific instructions for destroying Lily Reynolds' reputation. "This is Richard Blackwell, orchestrating a harassment campaign," Nathan said, his voice carrying across the room with deadly calm, "attacking a woman whose only crime was being kind to me." "Nathan, really?" Margaret began. "I'm not finished." Nathan advanced to the next slide, the fake escort website with detailed metadata, showing it had been created from Richard's company servers. Then the bank transfers, the coordinated social media posts, the stolen security footage from the Sterling, edited to look damning. The room had gone absolutely silent. For 3 days, this woman has been harassed online, had her career destroyed, lost her home because residents complained, all because Richard couldn't stand that I found someone who made me happy after Caroline left me. "How dare you?" Caroline hissed. Nathan turned to her with a look that made her flinch. How dare I? How dare you, Caroline? You left me 3 weeks after my father died. You told me I wasn't enough. Fine. I've accepted that. But you don't get to destroy someone else, because I moved on. This is all circumstantial, Richard said, but his voice wasn't quite steady anymore. IP addresses can be spoofed. Anyone could have shut up, Nathan said conversationally. Marcus, my head of security, has already filed charges with the Newport PD. Everything you're seeing here has been submitted as evidence. You're done, Richard. Your reputation is finished, and I hope every single person in this room remembers that attacking innocent people has consequences. He looked around the table at faces he'd known his entire life. Some looked shocked. Some looked uncomfortable. None looked surprised enough, which meant they'd known what had happened to Lily and done nothing. The Sterling Hotel will no longer host Society Council meetings, Nathan said, and I'm resigning from the council effective immediately. I want nothing to do with an organization that destroys people for sport. Nathan, be reasonable, someone said. I am being reasonable. Lily Reynolds is a talented photographer who gave her coat to a shivering server because she's genuinely kind. I asked her to help me through a difficult evening. She said yes, because she needed the money, and because she has a generous heart. What happened between us after that is nobody's business but ours. But Richard made it everyone's business? Lied about her, destroyed her reputation, turned her into Newport's entertainment. Nathan's voice rose with each word. She lost everything because she met me. Because I wasn't brave enough to protect her faster. Because I cared more about the Sterling's reputation than her safety. That ends now. He closed the laptop. The evidence has been given to the press. By tomorrow, everyone will know what Richard did. They'll also know that I'm proud to have met Lily Reynolds, proud that she let me know her, even briefly. And if Newport Society has a problem with that, you can take it up with my lawyers. Nathan walked out of the conference room with his head high and his heart hammering. He'd just burned every bridge his father had spent a lifetime building. Alienated investors, embarrassed the Sterling, declared war on Newport Society, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant protecting Lily. His assistant met him in the hallway with wide eyes. Mr. Cole, your phone has been ringing non-stop. Investors calling. Board members? The press wants comments. Tell the investors the Sterling's reputation will survive the truth, Nathan said. Tell the board. I'll address their concerns tomorrow. And tell the press that Lily Reynolds is an exceptional person who was targeted by small, cruel people, and I'm proud to defend her. And if people ask about your relationship with her, tell them the truth, Nathan said. I'm in love with her, and I'm hoping she'll give me another chance to prove it. The truth came out in 48 hours. Richard's empire collapsed in 72, and Nathan learned that sometimes the right choice costs everything and is still worth it. Lily saw the news in Providence, saw Nathan's press conference playing on every news site and social media platform, watched him stand in front of cameras and calmly, methodically destroy Richard Blackwell's reputation while defending hers. Watched him admit to the world that he loved her without flinching or hedging or protecting himself. The fake escort website disappeared within hours. Gossip bloggers issued retractions and apologies. Newport Society turned on Richard and Caroline with the same viciousness they'd turned on Lily. Except this time, it was deserved and backed by evidence. Richard's investors fled. His business partners sued. By the third day, his company was bankrupt, and Reacher himself was facing criminal charges for harassment and fraud. Caroline left him without a backward glance, already looking for her next mark. Lily's phone started ringing with apologies. Clients wanting to rebook. The landlord calling to say the complaints had been baseless, and her apartment was still available if she wanted it. Maya called, crying with relief that the nightmare was over. But Lily didn't call Nathan. Couldn't call him. Because how did she come back from this? How did she face him after he'd sacrificed everything to defend her? The Sterling's reputation, his standing in Newport society, relationships with investors and board members, all of it burned to the ground because Nathan had chosen her. On the fourth day, Nathan appeared at Maya's apartment in Providence, where Lily had been hiding. Maya opened the door, took one look at his face, and wordlessly pointed to the living room before making herself scarce. Lily stood when Nathan walked in. They stared at each other across Maya's cluttered coffee table, both uncertain how to start. "You came," Lily finally said. "Of course I came," Nathan said. "Did you see the press conference?" "All of it." "Then you know I meant every word." Nathan took a step closer. "I love you, Lily. I think I started loving you when you gave your coat away to a stranger. Definitely, by the time we danced. Completely, by the time you walked out of the library on New Year's. And watching you suffer for my mistakes nearly destroyed me." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You sacrificed everything for me." "I chose you over things that don't actually matter," Nathan corrected. "The Sterling will survive. My reputation will recover, but I couldn't live with myself. If I'd let you think I wasn't willing to fight for you, for us." "Nathan, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you faster. Sorry I let Richard hurt you. Sorry for every moment you thought you were alone in this. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. So please, Lily, give me another chance. Let me prove that you're worth more to me than all of Newport society combined." Lily crossed the room in 3 steps and threw her arms around him. Nathan caught her, holding tight, his face buried in her hair. She was crying, and he was probably crying too, and neither of them cared. "I love you too," Lily whispered against his chest. "Even when I was scared. Even when I thought loving you cost too much, I loved you anyway." "Never again," Nathan promised. "From now on, loving me only costs what all love costs. Time and trust and choosing each other, even when it's hard. No more sacrifices. No more transactions. Just us being real together." They stood in Maya's living room, holding each other while the world realigned around them. Everything had fallen apart. Everything had been rebuilt. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found each other on the other side. 6 months later, the Sterling's gardens glowed with fairy lights and possibility. Summer had arrived in Newport with gentle warmth and longer days, transforming the hotel grounds into something magical. Lily photographed it all with professional appreciation and personal joy because this was her home now. Not just Newport, the Sterling itself. Nathan had insisted on putting her name on the deed 3 months after they'd reconciled. "Equal partners," he'd said. In everything, Lily had argued. Nathan had been immovable. They'd compromised by Lily investing her own money, earned from her increasingly successful career, into the Sterling's renovations. Now, the hotel had a dedicated gallery space for local artists and a photography residency program that helped struggling creatives exactly like Lily had been. The Sterling thrived under their combined leadership. Nathan handled the business side with the skill his father had trained into him. Lily brought heart and creativity and connections to artists who made the hotel feel alive, rather than merely elegant. They'd turned the Sterling into something neither of them could have built alone. But tonight wasn't about the hotel. Tonight was about the two of them, and the question Nathan had been planning to ask for weeks. Lily didn't know. She thought they were just having dinner on their apartment's private terrace, the one that overlooked the gardens and the ocean beyond. She'd dressed casual in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose the way Nathan loved it, beautiful and unpretentious and absolutely perfect. Nathan had ordered Chinese takeout because Lily loved it and because grand gestures weren't about money or performance. They were about knowing someone well enough to give them exactly what they needed. They ate on the terrace with candles flickering, and the sound of waves below. Lily talked about a new client and a gallery showing she was planning. Nathan listened the way he always did now, like her words mattered more than anything else in the world. When the food was gone and the conversation had settled into comfortable silence, Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Lily's eyes went wide. "Nathan, let me ask first," Nathan said with a smile. "I've been planning this for weeks, and I'll forget everything if you start talking." Lily pressed her lips together, but she was already smiling, already crying, already knowing what was coming. Nathan opened the box to reveal a simple ring he'd had custom made by a local artist Lily admired. Not a massive diamond or an ostentatious display, just a delicate band with small stones that caught the candlelight like promises. "Lily Reynolds," Nathan said, and his voice was steady despite his hammering heart. "6 months ago you saved me from the loneliest night of my life. You danced with me when I was drowning. You kissed me at midnight and made me remember what real felt like. You've stood beside me through scandal and sacrifice. You've made me better just by being yourself." He took her hand, feeling her fingers tremble slightly. "I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But I also know I want to spend the rest of my life figuring them out with you. Will you marry me?" Lily was fully crying now, tears streaming down her face, even as she nodded enthusiastically. "Yes," she managed. "God, yes. I love you so much." Nathan slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly because he'd stolen one of her other rings to get the size, and had been paranoid for weeks about her noticing. Lily laughed through tears when she realized it. "You sneaky man." "Only when it comes to important things," Nathan said. He pulled her close and kissed her with all the love and certainty he'd been carrying for months. When they pulled apart, both were smiling through happy tears. They didn't plan a big wedding, didn't want the circus or Newport Society's judgment or anything that felt performative. Just close friends and family in the Sterling's garden on a perfect summer evening 2 months after Nathan proposed. Maya was Lily's maid of honor, standing fierce and proud beside her best friend. Nathan's father's best friend walked him down the aisle since his father wasn't there to do it. There were tears and laughter and vows they wrote themselves about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Nathan cupped Lily's face and whispered, "Thank you for saying yes that night, for pretending with him, for making it real." Lily smiled through tears and whispered, "Thank you for asking, for seeing her, for loving her exactly as she was." "Always," Nathan promised. Their kiss tasted like salt and champagne, and promises kept. When they pulled apart, their small gathering erupted in cheers. The Sterlings stood proud behind them, transformed from Nathan's inheritance into their shared home. The garden glowed with fairy lights and love. They'd fought for this. Both of them fought through loneliness and scandal and the ugliness of people who couldn't understand that real love wasn't transaction or performance or anything you could put a price on. Real love was choice, was showing up, was protecting each other even when it costs everything. Some people found love easily, others had to fight for it, bleed far at risk everything just to hold it for a moment. Nathan and Lily had fought and risked and nearly lost each other more than once, but they'd also laughed and healed and grown. Every New Year's Eve after that, they returned to the ballroom where it all began. They held champagne glasses and counted down to midnight and kissed like it was the first time, reminding themselves how far they'd come and how much they'd risked and how worth it everything had been. Because love wasn't always easy, but it was always worth fighting for. And Nathan and Lily had fought like hell. 2 years after that first New Year's Eve, the Sterling's annual gala was in full swing. Lily moved through the ballroom with her camera, capturing moments for the hotel's gallery, but she wasn't hired staff anymore. She was the owner's wife. Co-owner, technically, since Nathan had insisted on putting her name on everything after the wedding. Equal partners in all things. She'd argued he'd been immovable, They'd compromised by Lily investing her own money from her increasingly successful photography career into the Sterling's continued renovations. Now the hotel was theirs together. Nathan found her near the windows in the same spot where he'd first asked her to pretend 2 years ago. He slid an arm around her waist and said she looked beautiful. He said that every day. He said it was true, every day. Lily leaned into him and whispered 2 years. He pressed a kiss to her temple and agreed, saying it was the best decision he'd ever made. Asking me to pretend. Lily teased. Asking you to stay, Nathan corrected. On the dance floor, couples swayed to music while champagne flowed and the city glittered outside the windows. But Nathan and Lily only saw each other. The band announced 5 minutes to midnight, and Nathan held out his hand. Lily set down her camera and said, "Always." They moved to the floor, finding their rhythm immediately, like their bodies remembered even when their minds forgot. Nathan whispered that he loved her, in case he hadn't said it today. She smiled and said he'd said it 17 times, but she'd never get tired of hearing it. He said good, because he'd never get tired of saying it. The countdown began. People around them pulled their partners close. Lily's fingers tangled in Nathan's hair, while his hand pressed firmly against her back. She said she'd realized something. "What?" Nathan asked. "That night, when you asked me to pretend," Lily said. "I didn't say yes because you offered to pay. I said yes because I'd already started falling for you and just didn't know it yet." The crowd shouted, "Happy New Year." Fireworks exploded over the harbor. Nathan kissed Lily deep and sweet and full of 2 years of hard-won love. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I'm glad you fell," Nathan said. "Me too," Lily agreed, even though it was terrifying. "Especially because it was terrifying," Nathan corrected. Fireworks painted the sky in gold and silver and blue, while the ballroom erupted in celebration. Nathan and Lily stood still, holding each other, grateful for every moment that had led them here to this life. This love. This beautiful, imperfect, real thing they'd built together. They'd found something worth all of it. Worth the pain, the scandal, and the risk. They'd found each other, and that was worth everything. If you made it all the way to the end, please subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. I'd love to hear from you. On a scale of 0 to 10, how did this story make you feel? Drop your rating in the comments. I read every single one. Thanks for being here. See you in the next story.